The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital corridor as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, walked quietly beside her husband Prince William. Their footsteps echoed softly against the polished floors of Great Ormond Street Hospital, one of London's most renowned children's medical facilities. Today was different from their usual royal visits. Today, they came not with cameras following their every move, not with grand ceremonies or official speeches, but with something far more precious: their time, their hearts, and a promise they had made to a little girl named Emma. Emma Thompson was 8 years old, though she looked much younger due to her battle with a rare form of childhood cancer. Her bright blue eyes still sparkled with curiosity despite the months of treatment that had taken away her golden curls and left her small frame even more delicate. She had been at the hospital for nearly 6 months, and her room had become a small world decorated with drawings from her classmates, get-well cards from strangers, and photographs of her family's dog, Biscuit, whom she missed terribly. The story began 3 weeks earlier when Emma's mother, Sarah Thompson, had written a letter. Not to the royal family directly, but to a local newspaper, sharing her daughter's story and her one simple wish. Emma had been following the royal family's activities through news programs that played in the hospital's common room. She had become fascinated with Catherine's work with children and had expressed to her mother that she would love to meet the princess, not for any grand gesture, but simply to talk about their shared love of art and painting. Sarah's letter was heartfelt and honest. She wrote about watching her daughter's courage through painful treatments, about the way Emma would paint pictures of gardens and flowers even from her hospital bed, dreaming of the day she could run through real gardens again. The letter mentioned how Emma had been inspired by seeing Catherine visit other hospitals and how she would practice royal waves in her hospital gown, bringing smiles to the faces of other young patients in the ward. The letter found its way to social media, shared by the newspaper and, then, by thousands of readers who were moved by Emma's story. It wasn't long before it reached someone who knew someone who worked within the royal household. But, rather than the usual formal channels, this message traveled through personal connections, from one parent to another, from one person who understood the preciousness of childhood to another who had dedicated their life to protecting and nurturing young lives. William and Catherine heard about Emma during a quiet evening at home. They were reviewing their upcoming schedule when their private secretary mentioned the letter that had been forwarded through informal channels. As parents themselves, they were immediately drawn to Emma's story. Catherine, who had spent years working with children through her various charitable endeavors, felt a particular connection to this little girl who found joy in art despite her circumstances. That evening, Catherine sat in her study, reading and rereading Emma's story. She looked at the photographs that had been shared, Emma painting at a small easel that had been brought to her hospital room, her thin fingers carefully holding a brush as she created vibrant flowers that seemed to bloom with hope. There was something about Emma's expression in those photographs, a determination and joy that transcended her circumstances, that moved Catherine deeply. William found his wife there later that evening, still looking at Emma's pictures. They talked about their own children, about the simple joys of bedtime stories and morning hugs, about how different life was for families facing serious illness. They talked about the responsibility they felt, not just as representatives of the crown, but as human beings with the power to bring light into dark moments. The decision to visit Emma wasn't made in a boardroom or planned by a team of advisors. It was made at their kitchen table, over cups of tea, as two parents who understood that sometimes the most important things in life cannot be scheduled or staged. They made calls that very evening, not to their official staff, but to the hospital directly, speaking with Emma's doctors and her mother to arrange a visit that would be about connection, not publicity. The hospital staff were initially shocked by the informal nature of the request. Usually, royal visits involved weeks of planning, security sweeps, and carefully orchestrated events. But this was different. William and Catherine wanted to visit as quietly as possible, with minimal disruption to the other patients and families. They requested no media presence, no official photographs, and asked only that Emma's family be comfortable with the visit. Dr. Patricia Hayes, Emma's primary oncologist, was the one who spoke with Sarah Thompson about the proposed visit. Sarah later described that phone call as surreal, sitting beside her daughter's hospital bed, hearing that the Prince and Princess of Wales wanted to visit Emma, not for a photo opportunity, but simply to spend time with her. The doctor explained that the royal couple had specifically requested to know what would make Emma most comfortable, what she enjoyed, and how they could make their visit meaningful for her. Emma's reaction to the news was typical of an 8-year-old, excitement mixed with practical concerns. She asked her mother if she should wear her best pajamas, whether she should paint a special picture for Catherine, and if it would be okay to show them her collection of smooth stones that other patients had painted for her. Her innocence and genuine excitement began to affect everyone around her. Other families in the ward heard whispers of the upcoming visit, and the atmosphere in the children's wing began to change. The days leading up to the visit were filled with anticipation, but also with careful planning to ensure Emma's comfort. The hospital staff worked quietly to coordinate the visit around Emma's treatment schedule. Her mother helped her choose which of her paintings to display, and Emma spent hours working on a special watercolor of a garden scene, complete with a small figure she said represented Catherine walking among the flowers. Meanwhile, Catherine spent time learning about Emma's specific condition, speaking with pediatric oncology experts to understand better what Emma was experiencing. She read about childhood cancer, about the side effects of treatment, and about how to interact sensitively with young patients. This wasn't preparation for a formal engagement, it was preparation for meeting a child who had captured her heart. The night before the visit, Emma could barely sleep. Her mother sat beside her bed, reading stories and talking about the upcoming day. Emma had prepared questions she wanted to ask Catherine about her own children, about what it was like to live in a palace, and whether Catherine really did love painting as much as the newspapers said she did. In their own home, William and Catherine were also preparing, but their preparation was different. They were thinking about how to make this visit feel natural and comfortable for Emma. Catherine had brought some of her own art supplies, thinking they might paint together. William had researched Emma's favorite books, hoping to find common ground in stories and imagination. The morning of the visit dawned crisp and clear. Emma woke early, her excitement palpable despite the fatigue that was a constant companion due to her treatment. The hospital staff moved quietly and efficiently, ensuring that the visit could happen without disrupting the routines of other patients. There was an air of anticipation, but also of respect for the privacy and dignity of a little girl who had already shown more courage than many adults display in a lifetime. As William and Catherine made their way through the hospital corridors that morning, they carried with them not just the hopes of one little girl and her family, but the weight of understanding how much this moment meant. They were about to step into a world where titles and formalities mattered less than genuine human connection, where the most important royal duties were simply showing up with open hearts and the willingness to see the extraordinary in an ordinary moment between strangers who were about to become something more. The hospital room seemed to hold its breath as Catherine and William approached Emma's door. Inside, Emma sat propped up in her bed, wearing her favorite purple pajamas decorated with tiny stars. Her mother Sarah had braided the thin wisps of hair that remained after months of chemotherapy into 2 small plaits, and Emma wore a handmade crown of paper flowers that her younger brother had crafted for this special day. When Catherine entered the room first, followed by William, Emma's eyes widened not with the starstruck awe that might be expected, but with the pure delight of a child meeting someone she had been genuinely excited to see. Catherine's first words were not formal greetings, but rather, "Emma, I love your flower crown. Did you make it yourself?" This simple question broke any ice that might have existed and immediately established the tone for what would become an extraordinary hour. Emma shook her head and smiled, explaining that her 6-year-old brother Tommy had made it for her because he wanted her to look like a princess when she met the real princess. Catherine laughed genuinely at this, and William knelt down beside the bed to examine the crown more closely, commenting on Tommy's excellent craftsmanship. The authenticity of their interest in these small details set the stage for a visit that would unfold naturally, like a conversation between old friends rather than a formal royal engagement. Sarah Thompson watched from a chair beside the window, fighting back tears as she observed the immediate connection between her daughter and these 2 individuals who could have been anywhere in the world that morning but had chosen to be here. She later described feeling as though she was witnessing something sacred, not because of royal titles or official positions, but because of the simple human kindness being shown to her child. Catherine noticed Emma's art supplies arranged carefully on the rolling table beside her bed and asked about the paintings that decorated the walls. Emma's face lit up as she began explaining each piece: the rainbow she had painted during her first week in the hospital, the garden scene inspired by pictures of Kensington Palace Gardens, and her newest work, a portrait of her family including Biscuit, their golden retriever who visited when hospital policies allowed. As Emma talked about her art, Catherine pulled up a chair and genuinely studied each painting, asking questions about Emma's color choices and techniques with the same attention she might give to works in a prestigious gallery. William joined the conversation, sharing stories about their own children's artistic endeavors and the refrigerator gallery that had taken over part of their kitchen and home. The conversation flowed naturally from art to family, from hospital life to dreams of the future. Emma asked Catherine if being a princess was like being in a fairy tale, and Catherine's answer was honest and age-appropriate. She explained that being a princess meant having the opportunity to help people and meet incredible individuals like Emma, but that the best parts of her life were the ordinary moments, reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, and watching her children discover new things about the world. William shared stories about his work with Air Rescue, describing how helping people gave him the same feeling that Emma's bright paintings seemed to give everyone who saw them, a sense of hope and possibility. Emma listened intently, and, when he finished, she told him that she wanted to help people too when she grew up, maybe by becoming a doctor or an artist who painted pictures for hospitals. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Emma asked Catherine about being afraid. With the directness that only children possess, she explained that she sometimes felt scared during treatments and wondered if princesses ever felt scared too. Catherine's answer was perhaps the most honest and touching moment of the visit. She explained that everyone feels scared sometimes, even princesses, but that feeling scared didn't mean being weak, it meant being human. She shared that when she felt afraid, she thought about brave people she knew, and, from now on, she would think about Emma. Sarah watched as her daughter absorbed these words, seeing a new kind of strength settle over Emma's small features. It was the strength that comes from understanding that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite being afraid. As the visit continued, Catherine and Emma began painting together. Catherine had brought some professional watercolors, and Emma was thrilled to try paints that were different from her usual supplies. They worked side by side, Catherine following Emma's lead as the little girl created another garden scene, this time including figures that represented all the people who had been kind to her during her hospital stay. William engaged with Emma's mother, asking thoughtful questions about the family's experience and listening carefully to her answers. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances, but rather acknowledged the difficulty of what they were going through while also recognizing the strength he witnessed in both Emma and Sarah. Their conversation revealed the depth of his genuine concern and his understanding that sometimes the most valuable thing one person can offer another is simply being present and truly listening. The hour passed quickly, filled with laughter, shared stories, and moments of comfortable silence as they painted together. Emma showed Catherine her collection of smooth stones, painted by other young patients in the ward, each one telling a story of friendship formed in difficult circumstances. Catherine admired each stone, understanding that she was being shown treasures more valuable than any crown jewels. As the visit neared its end, Emma presented Catherine with the painting she had been working on for weeks, the garden scene with the figure representing Catherine walking among the flowers. But Emma had added something new, a small figure representing herself, standing beside Catherine among the blooms. She explained that this was how she would remember their meeting, as two friends in a beautiful garden. Catherine's response was immediate and emotional. She carefully examined every detail of the painting, praising Emma's skill and asking if she could display it in her own home. The request wasn't ceremonial politeness, it was a genuine desire to keep this gift where she could see it regularly. Emma's face glowed with pride and joy at the thought of her artwork hanging in her royal residence. But Catherine's gesture went further. She asked Emma if she would like to correspond through letters, to share more of her artwork and to keep in touch as Emma continued her treatment and recovery. This wasn't an offer made for publicity or as part of official duties, it was a personal connection that Catherine wanted to maintain because she had been genuinely moved by Emma's spirit and strength. William added his own invitation, asking Emma if she would like to visit Kensington Palace Gardens when she was feeling stronger, to see the real flowers that had inspired some of her paintings. He suggested that she could bring her art supplies and paint in the gardens if she wanted to, and perhaps meet their children, who he thought would love to hear about Emma's artwork. The emotional impact of these invitations was profound, not just for Emma but for everyone present. These weren't ceremonial offers or formal engagements, they were personal invitations from people who had been genuinely touched by meeting Emma and wanted to continue the friendship that had developed during their time together. Sarah Thompson later described this moment as the point when she fully understood that this visit had transcended its original purpose. What had begun as a kind gesture to fulfill a sick child's wish had become something deeper, a genuine human connection that would continue beyond this hospital room. As preparations began for their departure, Emma asked if she could give Catherine and William a hug. The natural, spontaneous affection of that moment, Catherine and William both embracing this brave little girl who had touched their hearts, became the image that would stay with everyone present long after the visit ended. The goodbye was bittersweet but filled with promise. Catherine and William left their contact information with Emma's mother, not through official channels but personally, ensuring that the correspondence they had promised could happen naturally and privately. Emma watched from her window as they walked back through the hospital grounds, waving until they disappeared from view. In the hours that followed their departure, the impact of the visit rippled through the hospital ward. Other families had caught glimpses of the royal couple, but, more importantly, they witnessed the transformation in Emma, a renewed energy and hope that seemed to radiate from her room and affect everyone around her. The visit had reminded everyone present that healing involves more than medical treatment, it requires hope, connection, and the understanding that one is valued and loved. The weeks following the hospital visit unfolded in ways that none of the participants could have anticipated. True to her word, Catherine began corresponding with Emma through handwritten letters, creating a private exchange that would prove to be as meaningful to the princess as it was to the young patient. These weren't formal notes written by staff, but personal messages in Catherine's own handwriting, often accompanied by photographs from her daily life and small gifts that reflected their shared conversations. Emma's first letter to Catherine arrived at Kensington Palace just 4 days after their meeting. Written in careful 8-year-old handwriting, with some words spelled phonetically and others clearly sounded out with help from her mother, the letter described Emma's continued treatment and included a small watercolor painting of Biscuit, her family's dog. Emma wrote about missing her pet and about how painting pictures of him made her feel closer to home. Catherine's response arrived within a week, a personally written letter that included photographs of her own family's dog, Orla, playing in the palace gardens. She wrote about understanding how much pets mean to families and enclosed a small sketch she had made of Biscuit based on Emma's painting. The letter also included pressed flowers from the Kensington Palace gardens, fulfilling a promise Catherine had made to share the real flowers that inspired Emma's artwork. This correspondence developed into something extraordinary. Emma began painting small watercolors specifically to include with her letters, creating a series of works that documented her experiences, her dreams, and her gradual recovery. Catherine responded not only with letters but began including her own small sketches, showing that she too found art to be a way of expressing feelings that words couldn't quite capture. The exchange remained private, known only to Emma's immediate family and Catherine's closest staff, but its effects were visible to everyone around Emma. Her spirits improved markedly, not just because of the excitement of corresponding with Catherine, but because she had found a genuine friend who valued her thoughts and artwork. Emma began approaching her medical treatments with renewed determination, often telling nurses that she needed to get better so she could visit the palace gardens as promised. During this period, Emma's story began to spread in unexpected ways. While the details of the royal visit remained private out of respect for Emma's family's wishes, word of the connection between Catherine and Emma reached other families in similar situations. Other parents of seriously ill children began writing to the palace, not asking for visits or special treatment, but simply sharing their children's stories and expressing gratitude for Catherine's visible commitment to children's welfare. Catherine and William found themselves deeply moved by these letters. They realized that Emma's story was not unique. There were countless brave children fighting difficult battles, supported by equally brave families who needed to know that their struggles were seen and valued. This realization led to quiet discussions between the couple about how they might extend their impact beyond individual visits. Meanwhile, Emma's medical team began noticing improvements that went beyond what could be explained by treatment alone. Dr. Patricia Hayes noted that Emma's engagement with her treatment plan had intensified, and her emotional resilience seemed stronger. When asked about this change, Emma would often mention her correspondence with Catherine and her determination to be well enough for the promised garden visit. The turning point came 8 weeks after the initial hospital visit. Emma's latest medical scan showed significant improvement, and her doctors cautiously suggested that she might be able to go home soon for a trial period. Emma's first request was whether she would be well enough to visit Kensington Palace, and, when her doctor confirmed that such a visit might actually be beneficial for her recovery, the excitement was palpable. Catherine and William were informed of Emma's progress through their ongoing correspondence, and they immediately began planning for the promised garden visit. However, they wanted this visit to be even more special than originally planned. Catherine suggested that Emma might enjoy meeting other children who shared her love of art, and William proposed inviting Emma's brother Tommy, who had made the paper flower crown for her hospital visit. The Palace Gardens visit was arranged for a warm afternoon in late spring. Emma arrived with her family, including Tommy and her parents, wearing a new dress that her grandmother had made specially for the occasion. She carried a small portfolio of the paintings she had created during her correspondence with Catherine, wanting to show how her art had developed during their friendship. Catherine and William met the family personally at the palace entrance, and Emma's greeting was that of a friend rather than a formal royal encounter. She immediately showed Catherine the latest painting she had brought, a garden scene that incorporated elements from the pressed flowers Catherine had sent in her letters. William knelt down to Tommy's level, complimenting him on his sister's reports of his artistic talents and asking if he had brought any artwork to share. The garden tour that followed was magical in its simplicity. Emma walked slowly, still regaining her strength, but her energy was focused and bright as Catherine showed her different sections of the gardens. They visited the flower beds that had inspired some of Emma's paintings, and Catherine explained how the gardens changed with the seasons, suggesting that Emma might like to return at different times of year to see these changes. The highlight of the visit came when Catherine led Emma to a small garden pavilion where art supplies had been set up. She had arranged for several other young artists to join them, children from local art programs who shared Emma's passion for painting. These children knew nothing of Emma's illness or her story. They were simply young artists invited to paint in the palace gardens alongside a new friend. Emma's joy at meeting these other children was profound. For months, her social interactions had been limited to family, medical staff, and other patients. Being able to talk about art, about favorite colors and techniques, with healthy children her own age was a gift that Catherine had thoughtfully orchestrated. The children painted together in the gardens, creating individual works while chatting and laughing in the way that only children can. William spent time with Tommy and Emma's parents, but his attention was clearly drawn to watching Emma interact with the other children. He later told friends that seeing Emma's pure happiness in those moments, her laughter as she painted alongside new friends, her animated conversations about art techniques, her obvious joy in simply being a child among other children, was one of the most moving experiences of his public life. The afternoon included a private tea in the palace, where Emma finally met Catherine and William's children. The meeting was carefully arranged to be comfortable for all the children involved, with games and activities planned around shared interests rather than formal introductions. Emma later described this as feeling like a playdate with friends, which was exactly what Catherine had intended. During tea, Emma presented Catherine and William with a special gift, a painting she had created showing all the people who had helped her during her illness. The painting included doctors and nurses, her family, other patients who had become friends, and, in the center, figures representing Catherine and William surrounded by the flowers of Kensington Gardens. She explained that this painting told the story of how kindness could bloom anywhere, even in hospitals. Catherine's response to this gift was deeply emotional. She later described feeling overwhelmed by Emma's ability to find beauty and meaning in her difficult experience, and by the child's capacity to see her illness not as something that defined her, but as part of a larger story about human kindness and connection. The visit concluded with promises of continued correspondence and an open invitation for Emma to return to the gardens as often as she wished during her recovery. But, perhaps more significantly, it marked the beginning of a broader initiative that Catherine and William would later develop to support families of seriously ill children. As Emma's family left the palace that afternoon, they carried with them not just memories of a wonderful day, but a renewed sense of hope and connection. Emma had spent months learning to be brave in the face of illness. Now she was learning what it meant to celebrate recovery and to look forward to a future filled with possibilities. The impact of this visit extended far beyond the immediate participants. Staff members at the palace, the children who had been invited to paint in the gardens, and even the medical team that continued to care for Emma all reported feeling touched by witnessing the genuine friendship that had developed between Catherine and this remarkable young girl. Most importantly, Emma returned home from the palace visit with a new understanding of her own strength and value. She had learned that her art mattered, that her story had touched important people, and that her courage during illness had inspired others. This knowledge would prove invaluable in the months ahead as she continued her recovery and began to envision her future beyond the hospital walls. 6 months after Emma's garden visit to Kensington Palace, her story reached the public in a way that no one had anticipated. It began with a local newspaper's follow-up article about children's recovery stories, where Emma's mother Sarah agreed to share their experience without mentioning the royal family's involvement. The article focused on Emma's remarkable recovery and her continued passion for art, including a photograph of her latest painting, a vibrant garden scene that clearly showed the influence of her palace visit. A sharp-eyed reader recognized elements in Emma's painting that seemed remarkably similar to the Kensington Palace gardens. Social media speculation began quietly, with people noting the improvement in Emma's artistic technique and wondering about the story behind her detailed flower paintings. The speculation might have remained minor chatter, but Emma herself inadvertently confirmed the connection during a school presentation about overcoming challenges. Emma had returned to school part-time as her health continued to improve, and her teacher asked her to share her story with the class as part of a lesson about courage and perseverance. In her innocent, matter-of-fact way, Emma described her illness, her hospital stay, and the kind princess who had visited her and become her friend. She showed her classmates the letters she had received, carefully omitting personal details but sharing Catherine's encouragement about her artwork. One of Emma's classmates mentioned the story to her parents, who happened to be journalists. Recognizing the significance of what they had heard, they approached Sarah Thompson respectfully, asking if the family would be willing to share more details of their experience. Sarah consulted with Emma, who was eager to tell people about the kindness she had received, and together they decided to share their story publicly. The article that resulted was unlike typical royal coverage. Instead of focusing on protocol or official duties, it highlighted the genuine human connection between Catherine and Emma. It included quotes from Emma herself, speaking with the clarity that children possess about what had mattered most to her during her illness. She talked about feeling scared and alone until she realized that even princesses could be kind friends who cared about art and understood what it meant to be afraid sometimes. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media filled with messages of support for Emma and her family, but, more significantly, with expressions of admiration for Catherine and William's approach to their royal duties. People were moved not by grand gestures or formal charity work, but by the evidence of genuine personal connection and ongoing friendship with a sick child. Letters began arriving at both Kensington Palace and Great Ormond Street Hospital from families around the world who had been touched by Emma's story. Parents of seriously ill children wrote about feeling less alone after reading about Emma's experience. Healthcare workers described renewed motivation in their work. Teachers wrote about using Emma's story to help their students understand empathy and courage. The impact on Catherine was profound. She later described feeling humbled by the public response and understanding more clearly the responsibility that came with her position. The correspondence with Emma had begun as a simple personal gesture, but its effects had rippled outward in ways she hadn't anticipated. She realized that small acts of genuine kindness could have far-reaching consequences when they came from someone in her position. This realization led Catherine and William to establish a new initiative focused on supporting families of seriously ill children, not through large-scale fundraising or formal programs, but through personal connections and individual attention. They began quietly visiting more children in hospitals, always with the same approach they had taken with Emma: genuine interest, personal attention, and ongoing relationships rather than one-time photo opportunities. Emma became an unofficial ambassador for this new approach. Now healthy enough to attend school regularly and participate in normal childhood activities, she continued her correspondence with Catherine and began visiting other children in her former hospital ward. Her story had given her a platform to help others, and she used it with the same courage she had shown during her illness. The transformation in Emma was remarkable to witness. From a frightened 8-year-old patient, she had become a confident advocate for other children facing similar challenges. Her artwork continued to improve, and she began donating pieces to the hospital to brighten the rooms where she had once been a patient. Her teachers noted her exceptional empathy and leadership skills, qualities that had been strengthened by her experience of receiving extraordinary kindness during her darkest time. A year after the initial hospital visit, Catherine and Emma met again at a special art exhibition featuring works by young patients from several London hospitals. Emma's paintings were displayed alongside those of other children, but the connection between artist and royal patron was evident in the way Catherine spent time discussing each piece with Emma, asking detailed questions about technique and inspiration. The exhibition became an annual event, growing each year as more young artists participated and more supporters rallied around the cause. Emma, now 9 and in complete remission, served as a mentor to newer patients, sharing her story and showing them that art could be both a source of comfort during treatment and a bridge to recovery and normal life. The media coverage of Emma's story had an unexpected effect on public perception of the royal family's role in modern Britain. People began to see Catherine and William not just as ceremonial figures or charity patrons, but as individuals genuinely committed to using their positions to create meaningful personal connections. The traditional model of royal duty, formal visits, ceremonial occasions, and official engagements began to expand to include quieter, more personal acts of service. Emma's influence extended to her own family as well. Her parents became advocates for family-centered care in pediatric hospitals, sharing their experience of how emotional support and hope could accelerate healing. Tommy, Emma's younger brother, developed his own artistic talents and became known in their community for creating artwork to comfort other families facing medical challenges. The story reached its emotional climax during Emma's 10th birthday celebration, which Catherine and William attended as personal friends rather than as official guests. The party was held in the same gardens where Emma had painted with other children during her palace visit, creating a perfect circle of healing and joy. Emma's birthday wish, shared with her friends and family, was that other sick children would find the same kind of hope and friendship that had helped her through her darkest days. Catherine's speech at the birthday gathering was brief but powerful. She spoke about learning from Emma's courage, about understanding that true strength often comes in small packages, and about the privilege of witnessing the remarkable recovery of someone who had taught her as much about resilience as she had hopefully provided in support. She announced that a new garden at Great Ormond Street Hospital would be dedicated to young artists, with Emma serving as the honorary curator. The dedication ceremony for Emma's garden, as it came to be known, took place on a sunny afternoon the following spring. Emma, now completely healthy and thriving in school, cut the ribbon alongside Catherine while dozens of young patients and their families watched. The garden featured easels and art supplies available for any child who wanted to paint outdoors, fulfilling Emma's suggestion that art should be accessible to every young patient who might find comfort in creative expression. Emma's story had begun with a mother's letter and a child's simple wish to meet a princess who seemed kind. It had evolved into a genuine friendship that demonstrated the power of personal connection across social boundaries. But, perhaps most importantly, it had created a model for how public figures could use their platforms not for grand gestures or publicity, but for sustained, meaningful relationships that enriched all involved. The final chapter of this remarkable story came when Emma, now 11 and an accomplished young artist, was invited to paint Catherine's portrait for a special exhibition of works by young artists who had overcome significant challenges. The portrait, completed over several sessions at Kensington Palace, captured not just Catherine's physical appearance but her genuine warmth and kindness as seen through the eyes of a child whose life had been transformed by simple human decency. When the portrait was unveiled, viewers were struck by its emotional depth and technical skill, but Emma's accompanying artist statement was what brought many to tears. She wrote simply, "This is my friend Catherine, who taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared, and that kindness is the most beautiful thing anyone can create. She helped me paint my way back to happiness." The story of Emma and Catherine became a defining moment in contemporary royal history, not because of its grandeur or political significance, but because of its fundamental humanity. It demonstrated that the most powerful acts of service are often the quietest ones, and that genuine kindness, sustained over time, could indeed move a nation to tears, tears of recognition, hope, and renewed faith in human goodness. Years later, as Emma grew into a successful young artist and advocate, and as Catherine continued her work with children and families, their friendship remained a testament to the possibility of finding extraordinary meaning in ordinary acts of human connection. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the simplest gestures, a visit, a letter, a shared hour of painting, could change lives in ways that no formal program or official initiative ever could.